It's a damn inconvenience sometimes. It's inconvenient to be an artist. It's costly. By the time you finish something, nobody knows what all you put into it. But you have to use your voice in some really creative way or it will turn on you. There's nothing that makes me happier than when I'm excited about a new idea that I'm working on, even if physically it's killing me. And I do call this the spark of the infinite when an idea comes through. My art isn't my therapy, but it is my sanity.
Welcome to Angel City Culture Quest, where art, social justice, and the environment meet in Los Angeles. I am your host, Melina Paris, and I welcome you to this episode. Hello, and welcome to Angel City Culture Quest. Today, I'm thrilled to bring you a conversation with Karena Massengill and her birds, Allie and Cleo. Karena is a prolific artist who lives in the harbor area of Los Angeles and San Pedro. First, I'd like to bring you a quick bio on my guest today. Karena attended California College of Arts and Crafts in Oakland, Temple University, Tyler School of Art, where she earned a Bachelor of Fine Art in 1975. After immigrating to Canada, Karena earned a Bachelor of Art in Education and Industrial Technology at University of Toronto. In Canada, she worked as an artist receiving numerous grants, exhibiting her work and creating public art projects. Karena also represented women in industry, working for the Canadian government while training as a welder-fitter at George Brown College alongside convicted felons seeking employment on a pipeline. She married her Australian husband in Canada before moving to Long Beach in 1986, and then in 1993 she earned a Master of Fine Arts in Sculpture at Cal State Fullerton. Karena is an art educator and former adjunct professor at Los Angeles Harbor College. Good morning, Karena. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you very much.
I'm so glad you're here today. I'm very excited to host you, and I'm excited to get into the work that you do. First, I want to give a little bit of a background on you, where you come from. Karena is originally from Ukiah, California, which is about 120 miles north of San Francisco in Mendocino County. And a fun fact, Ukiah is known for its nature, organic wineries, and renewable energy sources. I mention this for two reasons. First, today you're going to discover how significant the environment is in Karena's work. And second, Karena and her husband Grant live in a location where the land and sea and the port merge in San Pedro, a place where the beauty of the rugged coastline is juxtaposed alongside capital and industry. In fact, Karena, when I asked you how many mediums you work in, you said whatever you can think of. And it's not really about the medium for you. You like to work with different mixed media, but you're always resourceful. And you say the best form of what you do is recycling. And the best form of recycling is reuse. It's it's a good process that you have with that, and I think it's inspiring.
Thank you.
You said that it's not hard to be impacted by the environment. Can you elaborate on how it affects you a little bit?
Well, in my travels, I've seen the devastation that is wreaked upon people least responsible for climate change because of what we're doing. And now, more recently, of course, more affluent countries are being affected, so more attention is being paid to it. But it was one of the reasons why I was inspired to create a work for San Pedro that addressed the climate change, with having traveled up to see the glaciers in 2014 and how much they have been receding and I'm sure are much worse now. It inspired me to make a work that I collaborated with my nephew, who's a sound artist, Peter Wells. He helped me with the background, and then I had several works, some of them turning, that were in the foreground to create this nothing to see here, sort of a play on words, to see as an S-E-A and then H-E-A-R.
Yeah. Before we get much further, I want you to continue with this, but I just want to explain to the people what San Pedro is. You touched on it. It's an annual arts festival at Angels Gate Cultural Center in San Pedro. And on the Angels Gate website about Sound Pedro, it says, sound art is the oral equivalent of cinema, painting, theater, sculpture, and literature. Reframing the act of listening, works and performances explore the progression of sound from hearing to experience. You did want to touch on climate change and the glaciers and reach people through environmental works. And we had also talked about how it's a painful subject and that these works can hopefully make people think about it and then start to see or experience what global warming is about.
Maybe be inspired too, to try and, clean up their own footprint.
Definitely. So you did the Nothing to See Here, SEA and HEAR. 2019, and then the second project was in 2020 called Drip, Drip, Drip. And that's a fascinating piece. Can you describe that a little bit for us?
Well, it is indicative, again, of the melting ice, and it's a fused glass piece with a mirrored back with stainless steel sort of bent stock to, again, sort of imitate visually that process. Again, referencing the melting of the glaciers.
Yeah. And that piece, Drip, 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 was related to the time that you visited the Southern California beaches right before you went to college. You spoke about hearing how the water sounded hitting the rocks, combined with your visual experience of seeing all the people and sounds and wanting to replicate that sound.
Well, as a child, we used to go to Mendocino, where I actually had a little bit of art classes while my mom took the adult classes, and I've always loved the coastline. But seeing the changes in the tide pools, for instance, has really affected me, because when I grew up, that was back in the day, people would go fish for abalone, and they would just come back with, I remember, a basket. It had that was so full of abalone. And he was just giving it to everybody. And the fact is that we overfished it. But I think of the tide pools, how they look today down here versus there, I'm sure they're changed there too. More and more we see the effect of climate change on these tide pools. And it's frightening. It's scary.
It is a scary subject, indeed. And so this year for San Pedro, you did a video entitled Spoken Ice, and that's what you were leading into a moment ago with Sherry Keeson Burnham. Mm-hmm. And maybe the two of you are going to do more collaborations together. That's good to hear.
Yeah, I would love to do that. I mean, I was inspired when you've been in an ice storm, and afterwards everything is coated with ice. The wind makes it almost musical. So I had this idea to take blue glass, and I broke it and strung it together in a tree down on my property, and the wind made a beautiful sound that I could incorporate within the video. And then also photos from when Graham and I did, see the melted glaciers, sadly, and some of my artwork that has addressed this. And Sherry did a wonderful job of integrating the images together. It is on YouTube, Spoken Ice. My YouTube channel is just Karena for Art. If anybody wants to look it up, it's not very long, it's a couple minutes.
Yeah, and we're going to share it in our show notes so people can go right to it, click the link and see what you guys created. It's really beautiful, and I strongly suggest you check it out.
Yeah, I had never really been interested in video before, but except for Bill Viola's incredible work, the Long Beach artist, that his videos off the chart. I see the potential for reaching larger audiences and the emotional impact as well. It has a lot of potential, video. And I don't know, I don't really like doing video work, but, I could see if, working on other collaborations when it works, because it's just so, you can send it anywhere, you can see it, it's so accessible. It's a tremendous opportunity to communicate with a larger audience.
Yeah, and you mentioned that was one of the reasons it's like a new language, and you said that you liked working 2- and 3-dimensionally. Mm-hmm. And that's interesting about approaching it like a new language.
Thank you. Some people respond more to works on the wall. Some people respond more to something they can walk around. There's a physicality to it that you don't get with other works.
Exactly. And speaking about video, what I'd like to tell our listeners is Karena will do a brief walkthrough of the pieces that we're going to be talking about today. There are 4 of them, and that video link will be also in our show notes. And you can link on there, and you can see Karena in her studio, and you'll get little bits and pieces of her other work as well, so that'll be exciting. Now, I want to get into the environment a little deeper with your work. You often work in big pieces, but you said that you love the option of making intimate work. Recently, that you've been able to make small, intimate narratives about some of the ideas going on in your head, which is often about the environment. And one of these pieces is titled Flight. It's a beautiful, small piece. It's made of cast brass, aluminum, steel, African beads, and African gray feathers, also acrylic and resin. And just to try to give the listeners a feel for it, within a frame of resin, I believe, the cast brass, it looks like sturdy tree branches. They are crowned with a bold black and white bead, and fiery red feathers emerge from the branches, punctuating the scene, while along the bottom and coming out from the branches, metal loops swirl like a continuum of energy. It's a beautiful, striking piece, Karena.
Oh, thank you so much.
Yeah, and when you create these smaller, intimate works, is it perhaps related to reaching people more personally? Because the bigger picture that we've just been discussing with global warming is quite overwhelming.
Yes. Well, you hit it really on the head, because I do feel like it's wonderful to make something small and intimate that people need to look at, get up close and look at before they can really read it. And to me, it creates an intimate relationship as a result. I mean, this particular work, I so went with my intuition, and I see it also as a form of escape that, when things are so challenging and frightening, that to be able to escape into an artwork that has content that you may relate to, but also is open for multiple interpretations. It's engaging and it's inviting that way. I want people to be unintimidated. So often people think, oh, I don't know anything about art. Baloney, you know what you like and what you don't like. You don't have to have classes about art to just have your either visceral or just gut reaction to something.
Yeah, and what inspires you,
exactly.
Can you speak to how your travels have inspired your works?
Oh, yes. I mean, traveling has been tremendous for my artwork for multiple reasons. Seeing different cultures firsthand from around the world, for me, it emphasizes that we're all the same on so many levels. And in a sense, we're all family. I think that is so important. I mean, if people traveled, we wouldn't have bigotry, because people would just relate to each other and see how we're all the same, even though we have our different idiosyncrasies. We're all on this planet together. And I just wish there were a way that people that are so ignorant that can be bigots could just have a wider exposure. And maybe it's naive, but I believe that they wouldn't be so prejudiced, and maybe we'd have less problem with hate crimes. I don't know if that's true, but that's what my wish is.
I agree with you. I agree 100%. And you also mentioned about artists keeping up on doing their work. Yes. Sometimes they don't do that for various reasons. Maybe they're discouraged, or maybe they're having a hard time getting noticed or getting exhibitions. But you were talking about witnessing when artists don't remain consistent in producing work.
Yeah, I mean, I just know even for myself, my art isn't my therapy, but it is my sanity. And if I don't work, I really am not in a good place. And I can't imagine going too long without it. I think it would really severely hinder my mental health. And I just have seen so many artists that, can have a mental breakdown or major health crisis, addiction issues. If you have that drive, I mean, it's a damn inconvenience sometimes. It's inconvenient to be an artist. It's costly. It takes time and energy. And, by the time you finish something, nobody knows what all you put into it. But at the same time, it's what makes me whole. There's nothing that makes me happier than when I'm excited about a new idea that I'm working on, even if physically it's killing me. And I just think that really I think that if you have that drive and you don't satisfy it somehow, that it comes out in destructive ways. And I just think it's important, and I do call this the spark of the infinite when an idea comes through. But yes. I do believe that artists are born, they're not made. You have to find a way. You can find different voices, but you have to use your voice in some really creative way or it will turn on you.
Yeah, and that's exactly what you do. Now, your process is a very interesting one of your processes, I should say. When you do two things, you have two pieces, you have the original piece and an echo. Can you explain that for our listeners, how you came to that creation?
Well, I usually will do some sketches and then I work on a larger drawing while I'm thinking about how I'm going to put it together, usually with steel. So once I have the drawing, at least for the most part, figured out, I put it on my welding table and I start bending all of the steel to follow the line as I'm figuring out how I'm going to put it together. And it's on heavy watercolor paper. Because when I first was doing these, I was interested in different ethnic and age groups through like line portraiture, and I would do it on butcher paper. And then I realized that as the butcher paper caught fire, it made for an interesting work by itself. So I actually mounted those on canvas. They were very fragile. But that's when I got the idea to use the heavy watercolor paper. As I'm welding it still can hold its integrity. I control it with the spray bottle. But then I have like what I call an echo. It comes after the work. Once I've finished the welding, I take it off and I have something that I can turn into a painting. And when I do my walkthrough, I will show the work Shinto echo and then the steel work beside it so you can see the relationship of how that works.
Exactly. That's going to encompass exactly what you're talking about. And then you said that it becomes a reincarnation, right?
It feels that way to me. It's almost, I get a twofer for one thing. But in a way, it's like a different, I think of it as adolescent to adulthood. It gives me a painting canvas so I can further explore the concept, both either in color or monochromatically. And then for people to have their own private experience in my work, it's very important to me. When shown together, to me, they tell a story of evolution and even can be a spiritual discovery, inviting the viewer to reflect upon their own life and its challenges.
Yeah, it's different representations. And then you said it reaches the more diverse population because of that.
Yep.
That's wonderful.
Thank you.
So if you're just joining us, we're talking to Karena Massengill, a prolific artist living in the harbor area of Los Angeles. Thank you for listening. So next, speaking about environment, we're going to move to trees. We discussed Shinto, which the full title is Shinto Today and Yesterday Echo. That piece was shown at the El Camino College Art Gallery exhibition titled What Is It About Trees? And Shinto is made of charcoal and acrylic on arches. And to describe it, it's got a soft red background, which features charcoaled arching lines that conjure the rising curves of roofs on Japanese architecture and Shinto temples. It's the echo of your sculpture. The echo is made from steel and oils. The piece represents how Shintoism, which is the most widely practiced religion in Japan, they worship nature.
Yes.
And you said you found it really inspiring, and it's something that we can all agree on, I think.
Yeah. It's also meant to be a tribute to the incredible beauty of Japan. Like everything has an aesthetic quality. Even, the back stairs of an apartment building, everything, you just look at it and it's almost a work of art, just in that they have a tremendous sense of design and aesthetics. It's just beautiful.
Wonderful. It is inspiring to look at these constructions, and they're so perfect in a way. They sort of elevate your senses, I think.
Oh, thank you.
How did creating the separate pieces actually come to you?
That's what I said before about working on the butcher paper and then just realizing that the flimsy little butcher paper was actually, it was an interesting work of art by itself. Somebody said, wow, look at that. Because I was just throwing them away on crummy, and then I thought, wow, that's when I made big pieces of canvas and laminated. So, when they are shown together, they, would be the similar aesthetic of the sculpture and then the echo next to it. But then I experimented with other materials. I tried with Tyvek. Plastic, it melted, didn't work. But then I came up with the idea of using heavy watercolor paper. So that's worked very well.
It was a happy accident.
Yeah, right.
That's great. So you have another piece. And this one is a very recent piece. It's called The Tree That Was. This piece is made of stainless steel with oils, and it was inspired by the tree that used to be located on the other side of the fence, which leads to Sunken City near your home. Now this work is in iridescent tones. Two neighboring trees, one is full and young, the other is aged and many branches. And the earth is a presence in the piece, and it's got frothy clouds spotting the horizon's sky that resemble sea spray, I thought. And you have Catalina Island is in the distance. It appears to be almost as if it's the wind, which is visible through white darting lines that are both solid and dotted, and they're circling the trees, which give the tree motion.
We so loved the tree. In fact, during the first drought, Graham actually figured out how to get a long enough hose to run it from our house to try and keep it watered. But it did end up dying. And then it was standing, which we were very sorry about. But it was still there for a few more years. And then when we woke up and it was down, it had fallen in the night. And I felt sick about it. And that's when I was inspired to create a tribute to it, The Tree That Was. And I had done some other artwork with this view. In fact, I sold the sculptural part and the echo, and the woman that bought it loved it so much that she had it tattooed to her leg because she loved it so much. But yeah, I mean, this is just, again, represents trees that are dying all around us. So many trees are dying, and it's just scary. I mean, we just have to pay attention to climate change and hope that the people that can really affect change, the big businesses, will realize that they can make money but with green energy and just try and put their energy, or we're going to do ourselves in as a species, and it seems to be happening more quickly all the time.
I know. It's alarming. And a lot of this has to do with social justice, especially when it comes to the Amazon. But speaking of social justice issues, and as we touched on, you are an activist as well, and you attended your share of rallies and protests, especially in the last year or so. You also were inspired by this and created a piece called Shattered Lives. That piece was in an online exhibition at El Camino College from October of 2020 to January of 2021. Now, this piece is beautiful and striking. With its silver blue base painting, this piece depicts a shattered yellow rearview mirror. On it sits discarded aviator lenses, and underneath comes a rising fist, visually echoing itself in burnt hues, emerging from the fire. Bursts of animated pink hearts with one at the wrist center surround it. It's an inspiring piece. I hear myself using inspiring with your work a lot because it is that. We look at the pieces that you create, there's a visceral reaction in many of these pieces, and I think they do strike at people's hearts and minds.
Thank you. Well, making that piece, I realized I was torn because I felt like I'm not African American, but I still felt so angry. And I used that fist. That was all over the place, but I just couldn't not use that fist image. Yeah. And another thing, I realized how privileged I am, and I had never really thought about it. I've had such a privileged life, and I just think, it's just terrible for people who have had roadblocks thrown in their lives constantly, not to mention targeted when you're driving. So I felt very angry, which is one reason why I created that piece. Yeah, I just think when people are treated with such inequities and become frustrated, So I just put that into my artwork, but I understand why people, demonstrate it. I hope that it's made a difference. I think we are looking more at systemic racism as a result of those marches. I was struck by how many young people, first time I went out, were in them, and I was very happy to see that because, I'm going to be dead and gone. Who knows how much longer, hopefully a lot longer, but it's their future. They need to take the reins, and that's exactly what I think those movements, to me, it seems like they have.
Yeah, and I'm so happy to see it. I think we all experience sorrow, realizing what young people are going into, but it's important that they take control of it, and that's exactly what they're doing through protest. Now, you mentioned, Karena, about using reflection in your work.
Well, I've been using reflective materials, especially mirrors, broken. I find the act of looking at a fragmented image, it's a way of experiencing our environment with 4 different perspectives, even more self-reflection too. The first time that I worked with it, it was right after COVID began, and I had this dream, and I made this work that at first I thought, oh my God, am I foretelling my death? It really scared me, and then I realized it was like an exorcism. But you look in, you see the fractured image, and it's, you don't know whether it's keeping COVID out or keeping it in. But as soon as I finished it, I was able to break through and keep working, because I know a number of artist friends that have said when COVID first came out that they were just paralyzed for some weeks. It took me about a week, but then I got back on track. But yeah, the reflection I have just found interesting for ways I can't even completely explain. But I think largely, I just think the whole idea that I've always in my work wanted people to kind of reflect on themselves. And this becomes sort of a more literal interpretation of that.
Exactly. It's so important because that touches on what you mentioned earlier about continuing with your work for your own sanity and artists in general to continue their work. It's an important thing. And that leads us to a little bit more of your activism and a little bit on your teaching. You used to teach in an inner city school, and you wanted to impress upon your students that everything that we look at today in our world has an artist involved. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, sure. I think some of the kids that come from, they don't have a lot of money and they don't value their own work so much, and that for some of them, they don't see how they could make a living as an artist. So I think it's important for them to realize that there's, from industrial design to any number of graphic design, that, everything you see, as I say, it had some artist involved in making it. But yeah, one of the hardest things was just getting them to value their own work. And that I found it interesting that when I taught at a more affluent school in Palos Verdes, a sculpture class, that the kids really were no more talented than in the inner city, but they had expectations of themselves, of success, and I guess they just had a role model that they emulated in that way. And that, but I also try to have the kids realize, because in the in the poor schools that, I know the kids sometimes think if they had money that life would be easy, and, they think the rich kids, they've got it so easy. But what I wanted them to realize also is that, being an adolescent, being a teenager is difficult regardless of your affluence for multiple reasons. I pointed out to the kids, coming from a, somewhat strapped financial background that, if you had all the money, you think everything be good. Oh yeah, everything be great. I said, well, what if your parents are out busting their butt trying to pay this super expensive mortgage because it's a big giant house, and you have plenty of money but nobody to supervise you? Do you honestly think that you wouldn't maybe get into drugs or drink or abuse yourself in that way because of, having that accessibility? And they were sort of shocked by that. I said, plus kids coming from really affluent homes, they feel so stressed about trying to be able to be as successful as their parents are. And so I just think no matter what, the teenagers, as I say, it's a challenge, and that ideally they, can support each other going through this stages of life.
It's a challenge no matter who you are.
Exactly.
Like you said, for different reasons.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that was interesting in the sense that you flipped it over a little bit in your example because it equalized the playing field for the kids, I think.
Yeah.
It showed how it can be hard from anybody's perspective to be a teenager for different reasons.
Yep. I mean, the fact is that we tend to have our own, ideas that we just sort of go along with. And whenever someone comes along with maybe a challenging variation on that perspective, it takes a little while to process.
It does, especially when you're younger, but that's the best time to be considering these things. You said that you do make work that people are curious about. You never know what can come of it in terms of people thinking about it in their own lives.
That's right.
So you're challenging people academically and artistically. In saying this, you were recalling your friend who is a poet and writer and editor of Modern Maturity magazine and also a press telegram here in Long Beach, Ken Wibicon. You said that was something that you both felt strongly about as artists, the responsibility to make people think and feel. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, we both sort of considered ourselves, he's passed away now, he's a dear friend, but we considered ourselves, I called him poet warrior, but we were warriors just trying to make people think and feel and do a little bit more reflection about their own lives and experiences from different perspectives. And then that actually brings to mind about the public art. Why I see public art so special is because, it's a lot of trouble. It takes years to get it off the ground. But it's exciting because, many people in the public who would never or who have never been to maybe a gallery or a museum see the work, and it provides an opportunity to provoke conversation and self-reflection, which I think is very exciting.
It is. Yeah. And we always need more public art.
I agree.
Well, Karena, this has been my pleasure to talk to you. I'm so happy to have hosted you on Angel City Culture Quest. Can you please tell us a little bit about your present and upcoming exhibitions? And can you tell us what your website address is?
Sure. I'm presently in the Greenlee art space. It's called Rooted. It'll be on until October 9th. It's partly for a fundraiser to help create artist workspaces in India. And then I will also be in a show at Sola. It'll be opening on November 13th, and it's part of the critical response process. It's a group of 12 artists that have been working together for over a year, and this will be the culminating opportunity for us to show our work together during the pandemic.
Wonderful. And what is your website?
My website is Karena, Karena, and then no space, Massengill, MASSENGILL.com. And I also have an Instagram, I guess you call it my handle, is Karena, and then the number 4 art. And you can actually look up my YouTube videos too if you go to YouTube and put Karena 4 art.
Wonderful. Karena Massengill, thank you so much for being here today.
Oh, well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and recommend on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.